watching this on Facebook, you might really know me only as a troll or as a pest that you know in real life. But I've been working probably since late last year on actually doing some real reporting and talking about issues that are important to me and talking with people that have something to say. And I'd like to present to you the best of 2018, where I get to talk to a lot of people with diverse points of view and diverse places of living, I guess you'd call it, diverse backgrounds. And one of the things that I had to do, because there was a lot of footage, a lot of different topics to pick from, and I was only doing this in a couple short hours, was to divide this by domestic and international topics. So what you're about to see is the domestic U.S. topics. Now, the first person that came up was on April 27th. I interviewed Abdul Karim Nafi, Black Lives Matter organizer. I didn't know if the interview would really go well because I never interviewed anybody before in a professional or otherwise capacity, but we got off to a great start, and I'm hoping to get him back sometime, and we'll talk to him. He's had a couple things happen in his life, but uh, we'll try to discuss that at the appropriate time. So without further ado, this is the best of 2017 for Bold Like a Leopard's Troll Tribune interview series.
I'm going to move to a different topic now. Again, like we spoke about, earlier, this is it's not national BLM, but it is a different chapter. It was Wichita, Kansas, and there was an incident in 2016 where some of their members were holding a demonstration, and there were some police officers that went and apparently had a conversation with them, and for some reason, cookout broke out. Now, that BLM chapter was actually decertified by National BLM. Now, I'm not telling you whether to say whether that decision was good or bad, but how much and in what manner would you say it is acceptable for BLM activists to interact with police officers?
So, well, I can bring your attention to a proposed situation here. There was a an artist, photographer, who had a display that he wanted to put up, but he wanted to take pictures first, of course. And it was called Black and Blue Side by Side. And I was invited months in advance. Then they were finally having it. The guy was just, he never got my phone number. The people never gave him my number, but the emails just kept coming. And, I was not interested. And I told him I was not interested. And it wasn't up for debate. And it was for two reasons that I was not interested. One was that there is a sentiment amongst us nationally that we're not to give legitimacy to the police when, in that form, when the police are in fact not and have not and will not give legitimacy to us. They're the ones with a problem. We're a reaction to the problem. They're the ones with a problem. They've yet to admit that they have a problem.
Okay.
Okay, so after we spoke to, or I spoke to Kareem, we kind of went in a different direction, talked to somebody who's involved in a topic that's really caught fire in 2017, and for both fortunate and unfortunate reasons. Dan Casimir calls himself national or a natural nationalist, talking about his white identity and the need in his mind to preserve the white race. Very good conversation. We had him on, I think, a second time as well. Didn't really, I think he was kind of feeling more depressed at that point, so we never featured it. I'd love to have him back, but here it goes, and he's talking a little about where we agree on why people choose that way of life.
that's the way I'm trying to approach the identity.
So let me jump back in there for a second. So what you're talking
Sure.
about, I've seen. I actually, as a kid, I'd read a lot. I was kind of like a library bookworm because I'd cut school so much. So I used to read a lot about the neo-Nazi movement in America, and that's kind of the image that we get. We get this this tattooed guy, usually with a shaved head, maybe a goatee, has been to prison for San Quentin or whatever, and it's largely because of but people don't talk about why that motif even was created, but um, what you're talking about is actually a result of I read about in some of those books. They weren't exactly academic texts, but they were broad outlines of the neo-Nazi movement, and they would interview recruiters, and they would say some things that are along the lines of what you're saying, which is briefly, they would go to usually a high school, and they would talk to the white kids, and they'd say, look, the Latino kids have a group that they go to and they can celebrate their culture. Let's say in California, it would be Central American or Mexican. Then you would have obviously the black groups. There aren't so much an issue with Koreans and other Asian groups, but they tend to gather together. People tend to sit together. And what they would do is they'd say, hey, those guys have groups for themselves. You need a group for you. And this is the unseen truth that it belies the whole myth about these people being degenerate criminals to begin with. These are people, they were raised in the era of multiculturalism. And what multiculturalism has failed to do is to explain to people that even if they're not in one of these discriminated minority groups, let's call them, that their own culture has a value. That if your name is, let's say, Seamus McDonald, and you have Irish heritage or whatever, that you have a rich history to sit back on, and it's not always within the confines of white nationalism, which is something that confuses me, because white nationalism is a weird thing. We don't, and it's the same problem with black nationalism. It's something I didn't get to go into with my other guest the previous time, but you're talking about Africa being a continent, numerous different people there.
So I think I can quickly give maybe a thought on that. Black Lives Matter identifying person would say is that because of the African history in America, the socialized of that demographic is black, right? So it is really the only way to deal with that grouping. And so I think in these, you just touched on everything that I'm wrestling with. Like, I appreciate that a lot. Because well, we can get into that, but I would kind of say that one of the problems, and I would say that it is in a lot of ways that we are at the place that we are, and that'll be integrated into the answers to what you were talking about prior. But what's happened with the postmodernist movement within a neo-Marxist framework, and postmodernism is about deconstructing things and eliminating the variety or classification of something being more valuable than something else, and it's nested within Marxism because that is the simplest value structure. It's
Bingo.
1, 2, oppressor, oppressed. Yeah. So that's why that is, and but in that system, socialized into a conglomerate, and we have kind of, obviously to a much less acute degree, been stripped of the individualized, more individualized identity types to a large degree, and B, context are only identifiable as white.
Okay, episode 4 in the chronology was with Esperanza Marquez, which is, by the way, an alias. And this was because she works in a public school, was feeling a lot of censorship because of her colleagues. There's a lot of groupthink in terms of the politics there, also in terms of the educational curriculum there, not so imaginative. She spoke a lot about two issues. First of all, not related to her job, but being a Bernie Sanders supporter and the issues of dealing with the Sanders campaign and the disappointment of his endorsement of Hillary Clinton. Also, spoke a little about the issue of educating illegal immigrant children in public schools, which, as of right now, they do have to be in public schools. It's a very serious issue. There's a gang violence issue, but there's also the issue of how do we deal with people coming from other countries that aren't so used to our educational system. So please enjoy.
Do that. Did you feel once he bowed out? Remember, this was in July. Did you feel that your vote was taken for granted by the rest of the party?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I was like, when he decided, I'm sorry, that's my daughter in the back. Once he decided to, well, okay, when he stepped out, for me, it wasn't even when it wasn't the moment when he stepped out. It was the moment when he endorsed Hillary. I don't know if you remember that moment, but the look on his face, the expression on his face did not indicate any type of, he did not show any enthusiasm. There was no heart behind his decision to endorse Hillary Clinton. And that for me was when I felt betrayed by the party, when I felt betrayed by Bernie, and when I felt that definitely that my vote did not matter any longer. That not even that I was being taken advantage of or that I was taken for granted in any type of way. That I did not matter. That it was being forced upon me, per eventual nomination.
Here's a sensitive question. What is your view on the influx of illegal immigrant students into the public school system?
Yeah. All right. So I want to say, I think it's important for me to say up front that my personality is one of an empath, okay? So basically I have a bleeding heart. But I'm not a bleeding heart liberal. So what I mean by that is, when it comes to when I hear people's experiences crossing the border or coming into this country and what their experiences in their home country were and why they chose to come here and, how hard they work and the sacrifices that their families have to make to get here, it makes me as a teacher want to provide them the best that I can to them to make so that they can become a success, whatever success is in their minds, right? If success is holding down a good job, to send money back home, to their home country, or success is, going to college and establishing a career, whatever success is, I feel like when I hear those stories, I want to be the best teacher possible. However, it really the amount of resources that it takes to educate these children who come from countries where sometimes they may not have even gone to school. They may have only gone to school to second grade, or they've had an interrupted education. The resources that it takes to help them to graduate, we are held to certain standards, for example, and we consistently do not meet those standards because of the number of illegal immigrants that we have in this country? How does in our school? How does that work? Well, we're supposed to be graduating everyone within 4 years. Now, if you are an ESOL student, for example, for some reason, I don't by law, you have up until the age of 21 to graduate high school. So they could stay for an extended period of time.
About a day after speaking with Esperanza, there was this topic that came up kind of offhand because of a fellow interviewee from the Testigo Venezuela series, where he said, well, this is a guy that can talk about guns and police violence and all that. Well, I had him on. His name was Kay Shakur. I was expecting a little more of somebody who would be a little more of a debating partner, maybe even an argument would break out. Kind of the opposite occurred. To talk a lot about meditation, a lot about martial arts. Very interesting topic for me. I asked him a lot of, questions off air about the martial arts issue, because I do dabble a bit in it. But he really started talking about alternative issues that are not addressed in the media about reducing citizen police violence. He's somebody who worked with the police. So please take a look at this segment. I encourage you to watch the whole interview, though, because it's really hard to do it justice in just a small clip.
I was going to bring up the issue of gun control. Now, I'm a mechanical engineer. I know other mechanical engineers with years and years of knowledge and manufacturing experience. Is the weakest opinion possible. I believe that there is no law, technology that will prevent firearms from reaching the hands of people that want firearms for whatever reason they may be, good or bad. And I know that based on the industry I'm in now and the industries I worked in, job. And yet there's a lot of people that think that citizen should not be armed, at least not with assault rifles, for example. There's people that say that the Second Amendment is outdated. What's your take on that? I mean, there's a lot of people in urban America, in some cities, and I don't know what the numbers are. It could be that it's only a few people, so maybe I should rephrase it. But they want to defend their businesses, and these are people of all races, Koreans, Black people, Arab Americans. They want to defend their businesses. So what is your view on that issue of personal firearm ownership?
Well, I feel this.
Do you think it's a sense on your own job? Yeah.
I feel this way. I feel that the Constitution allows for American citizens to have firearms, and I feel that they should. Now, I feel if a person has a history of felonies and on their record, or they have they've been diagnosed of having various mood disorders and psychological disorders, I think that could be that population of people would be in question. Also, people that might have a history of domestic violence or any type of violence, that those folks should be sanctioned, where they aren't allowed to be able to purchase firearms legally. But I think any American citizen that is above the age of 18 or 21, depending on the state, should be allowed to own a firearm. Along with that, I feel again,
where we had like a bad signal. I think we're back. Sorry about that.
Along with that, I think that education, again, I think that firearm training and the philosophy and responsibility of firearm training is something that should actually be at least in our high school system, so that people are educated to be responsible, along with, again, with our promoters, mind-body exercises, where people learn how to calm the mind and how to deal with inner self-control.
So the last person who made this best of on the domestic side was Sun Fei Yang. And we kind of discussed a topic that's more of a personal interest for me. For him, it's a little closer because he's a Chinese American. I think he was, I believe, born here. But we discussed the topic of Mao Zedong, who, to me, he kind of stands as this ignored dictator, and probably the most butcherous individual in the history of mankind, and we kind of talked about the nuances of it. And I think we did a second interview of it later. And for me, that's kind of where, you know, interviews, I think they can develop into something where we really uh, unpackage a lot of the different perceptions people have based on where they're coming from of the same topic.
The episode, it's not an episode. It really was what it was like about 3 or 4 years or so with the Great Leap Forward, and I did read about it. There's a book that I read called Mao: The Unknown Story by Jung Chang that I read probably, I want to say 11 years ago, and it really changed and this is coming from somebody I have relatives who perished in the Holocaust, but this has to be, and I'm going to take a liberty myself. I personally, after reading this book, I considered what happened in China to be the worst abuse of humanity in human history, in recorded history, not to be redundant, and bar none, worse than Cambodia, worse than World War II. But there still happen to be people in the United States and in Peru and obviously China has never repudiated Mao. Do you think that the characterization of him as this awful, venal, greedy dictator is too harsh, or that we're really scaling back on it? Because a lot of Westerners don't really read about Mao. We're a little too focused on Europe.
So I would push back a little bit on that, because the nature of the Great Leap Forward, Mao was not trying to kill Chinese people. He was not trying to purge the society of undesirables at this point, at least. Like, he was trying to move Chinese society forward, and it was a terrible idea, and it really backfired. A lot of people died, but he wasn't like Hitler. He wasn't trying to exterminate a race. He wasn't like Pol Pot in Cambodia, where he was trying to rid society completely of undesirables. So there is that element of dehumanization that I think wasn't quite there yet. That's a completely different story once we get to the Cultural Revolution, in which you did start seeing those kind of purges. But it honestly was a well-intentioned, extremely poorly planned, extremely poorly executed strategy. And another reason that it was so bad was that about 1 year into the Great Leap Forward, internal elements in the Communist Party started to criticize Mao. And this general called Peng Dehuai, who was China's big war hero, not just during the Civil War, but also in the Korean War, he was criticizing Mao. He said, Mao, like, this is an absolute failure.
Okay, I think another highlight, I'd say, was the second best highlight of the domestic video interviews, was the one with Benjamin Boyce, who has done a fantastic, phenomenal project on YouTube called Expose Evergreen. And he was discussing a lot of that environment of the college atmosphere now, where you're infantilizing students. You're sort of creating a parallel society, as opposed to training people, or at least giving them some guidance on how to succeed in society at large.
We had a world of our own that's mainly focused on getting into our careers. Mm-hmm. And then we'd walk to the cafeteria or wherever the main student body was, and it was just a totally different world. In the 4 years that you went to Evergreen State, did you see like a real tidal shift that caused what happened today, or is it kind of something that's been there the whole time, and we're just seeing it bubble to the surface due to external events?
I think both are correct. I think that a lot of Evergreen, the humanities part of Evergreen, and humanities includes history, sociology, and then all the various, even media production and stuff. There's always been an Evergreen, historically, a strong social justice activism bent. And there's a very strong in the humanities, and I did pretty much all humanities at my time there, because that's what I'm interested in communication and in refining communication and pursuing excellence in communication and all the different forms of that. But there's always a framework of leftism, and these, I hope we can use these terms kind of loosely, because I think they shift a lot. But over the course of my time there, when I first got there, I encountered, kind of just young feminists learning that they have power over men, and learning that men have power over them, and needing to wrestle with that, and other sorts of activist things. And I kind of just shrugged it off and figured out faculty that wouldn't cause me to operate within that rubric, where I could operate within the liberal Western tradition, as I think of it, of high art and fine art and higher literature and stuff like that. But
I almost forgot to include this guy, but I did speak to Josh Seidel, who was kind of about as close of a background to myself as any of the guests. Jewish right-wing activist and writer. He sort of dropped off the scene lately, but we had a lot of good dialogue, kind of shared our own experiences, many of them similar. So I'll leave you to that one, and then we'll wrap up.
I think in the Jewish community, there has been, in my opinion, an overexposure of the topic in relation to politics in the past couple of years. What do you think, in your opinion, is the proper place for religion and religious affiliation in politics, and then a conversation, just the identity part?
Yeah, I have to admit, when I'm being honest with myself, my real problem with where the Jewish community is with religion and politics is the particular politics. I don't have a problem with religion and politics as a general, kind of as a general notion. And I think, not that was what America was intended to be. I certainly support our Bill of Rights and separation as we define it here between church and state. I don't think that's necessarily what Israel was intended to be. And I don't think there's anything wrong with your religious values and beliefs influencing your politics. What I would say the problem is that, what a lot of our community is doing is putting politics into religion, saying, okay, my personal politics is in fact Judaism, and sort of doing it the other way around, instead of, bringing Judaism and letting it influence what your politics is going to be. You're taking politics first, and then trying to sort of wrap your Judaism around it. And of course, I have more of a right-wing perspective. I'm talking about the sort of the liberal reform wing, which of course is in our community very large, in relation to, for example, like mainline Protestants in the Christian community, which is a smaller, portion of their community. So they have a much louder voice, and I think a lot of times, again, I see, thought pieces and articles talking about Judaism. This is Judaism, and what it really is sort of liberal politics, and that concerns me greatly. We don't want to define, we want to have Judaism as something objective, something that is separate from politics, and no matter what politics is going on around it, that remains unchanged.
So to add on a lighter note, it's called the Troll Tribune for a reason, and my first guest actually expressed that pretty directly.
Well, you know what? We gotta get our buddy, our mutual friend. Maybe he can do an interview with you, but you gotta promise not to do any more of those Care Bear gifts.
Oh, was that what did it?
Oh my God! Listen, that is what made me say I'm dealing with a troll supreme. I had to bow down to you on that one. The timing of it was perfect.
All right, well.